All right, how's it going, everybody? So today I'm going to talk about your second essay for this class. Heads up, this video might be a little long because there's a lot that goes into writing an essay, but I'm going to try to, go at a decent pace, so I'm not going too fast or too slow for you. So, luckily, you've already written an essay like this. This essay is going to be very similar to the first one you wrote, but it's different for two main reasons. One is that you've already written an essay kind of like this. You've written an argumentative paper, so you're going to bring in some of that experience and that knowledge, hopefully, into this one. You have experience now finding quotes, you have experience writing a thesis, you have experience coming up with an argument, right? All that jazz. The other reason it's different, though, is that you have to find your own source for this essay. So in the first one, you were given two readings and you were told to use a quote from both of them, right? That's the same case in this one, but on top of that, you also have to find a reputable source online and use a quote from that to support your thesis. So I'll have a video about finding a reputable source, and I'm sure Professor Solinger is going to talk about that as well, because obviously, you can't like find some BuzzFeed article or whatever. But we'll get to that when it gets to that. If you haven't done the readings already, obviously you should read those before you continue. It's the Carr reading about how smartphones hijack our minds, and then the one that has two authors, the one that basically says technology does not is not making us dumber. So read those and then come back. But the question that you're going to be answering for this essay is, do you think technology actually can harm our ability to learn and remember? Why or why not? So for this question, right, you can stick to a simple yes or no answer. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. But you can still answer it with more nuance if you want to. Oh, yes, it does. However, or in some ways it does, in some ways it doesn't. But if you choose any of those options, even if it's still still the simple yes or no answer, your stance needs to be clear and it should not have any vague language. So if you say, oh, it does in some ways, it doesn't in other ways, in what ways, right? In what ways does it harm our ability to learn and remember, or in what ways does it, does it not? Or does it harm our ability to remember, but it doesn't harm our ability to learn, right? Be specific about, where you're going with it. And that, I'll get into that as you see how I approach my thesis, because my thesis is specific. So I also have made a video on how to write a thesis that's on my tab in Blackboard, and I would highly recommend checking that out because the thesis is pretty important if you haven't got that already, and they're pretty hard to write. So I'm going to be using a lot of the same tools that I give you in that video here, but if you want a more specific guide of how to write a thesis, you can check that out as well. So no matter what, though, is I always start with the readings, and then I'll choose my stance after. So that might confuse you because you're like, oh, well, if you see this question, it's very tempting to just say, oh, obviously it harms our ability to learn and remember, or oh, it doesn't, right? And you kind of want to make that quick judgment, but remember, you have to use evidence from the readings that you're given. So sometimes your readings might not give you evidence for one of those sides. So, thinking about your final exam, you don't know the readings yet. So if both of the readings are very biased towards one of the sides, it might be really hard to argue the other side of the question. Luckily, though, for you guys, in this case, the readings that Professor gave you are very split. So the Carr reading is kind of anti-technology. It's saying technology does hinder our ability to learn and remember, while the other reading is saying, oh, no, it doesn't, right? It's actually not that bad. So in this case, I just went with my gut, and I said, yes, technology does harm our ability to learn and remember, because that's kind of what I would argue if I was going to write this essay. And then luckily, because you have to find a third reading, you can use that third source to sway your reader. And, I'll find a source that agrees with my opinion, right? Excuse me. So now that I know my general direction that I'm going, which is yes, technology does hinder our ability, right? I'm going to go through the readings again, and I'm going to look specifically for quotes that support that idea. So I start with the Carr reading, because again, that one's the one that kind of agrees with my side. And I find this quote. Quote, afterward, the researchers asked the subjects to write down as many of the statements as they could remember. Those who believed that the facts had been recorded in the computer demonstrated much weaker recall than those who assumed the facts wouldn't be stored. Anticipating that information would be readily available in digital form seemed to reduce the mental effort people made to remember it. End quote. So, obviously if I was going to use this quote in the paper, I would have to introduce it. You can't just start with afterward, after what, So I would say, oh, there was a study done and this is how they conducted it. And then I would say afterward, the researchers asked the subjects to write down. But obviously, I think it's pretty obvious that this quote ties in with my idea, right? yes, technology hinders our ability to learn and remember. Here we see that if we assume, a smartphone is going to remember something for us, we do not remember something as well, right? So an example I thought of in regards to this is, phone numbers. I used to remember my mom's phone, my dad's phone when, I would either have to call them from school or from somebody else's house or a home phone or whatever. But, as soon as I got a phone and I just have a catalog of, all the phone numbers in there, it actually impacts me because I don't remember any of the numbers of people I'd have to call because I don't live in the same state as my family anymore. So in an emergency, I would have to call my roommate or my friends or somebody, but I don't remember any of their phone numbers. So I could potentially use some of this like anecdotal evidence or this example in my essay, but I'm just trying to think of, real world impacts of what happens when we rely on technology to remember things for us. So, here I'm starting to craft just a little bit of my thesis, right? I'm just going to start drafting it up. So very basic, right? Technology does harm our ability to remember. I haven't even touched the learn part of the question yet, and that's fine. I'll get to that at the end. But I just want to start like having a working thesis is what I call it, and it'll change. It's okay for thesis change, but again, I'm still going to be specific. So just to start out with, technology does harm our ability to remember, and I'm going to pair that with an idea that I'll get from the other reading. So, excuse me. So we go to the other reading, which, spoiler alert, is not going to be as easy to find evidence for because, again, it's kind of in opposition to the Carr reading. But I did find this quote, and it says, "When technology was available, people relied on it. But when it was not available, people were still perfectly capable of remembering. As such, it would be hasty to conclude that technology impairs our ability to remember." So this might be a little confusing, right? Because you could look at that and you're saying, oh, that goes against your argument, right? This quote is saying, oh, it's hasty to say that technology impairs our ability to remember when I just said it does. But you have to be very, like, I don't know, specific and like really scrutinize the reading here. Like, look very closely, right? And see, like, read the exact language it's using. Because it says, quote, when it was not available, people were still perfectly capable of remembering it, end quote, right? So, right, when it was not available, and that might be true, but let's think about it, right? When was the last time technology was not available to you or to me in the last 5 or 10 years? Like, practically never, right? So while technically we can still remember things if we want to, or if all of technology is wiped out and it's not an option anymore, it's the prevalence and just the fact that technology exists all around us that effectively worsens our ability to remember things because we just assume it will be there and therefore we're going to over rely on it. So does that make sense? You have to really follow my logic here, right? So I start out by saying, with the Carr one, oh, we see this study, it says that technology, worsens our ability to remember. Then I have this quote that says it doesn't, but then I'm gonna, in my paper, I would say, oh, but this quote is wrong, right? And I would say they're wrong because they assume that technology might not be available at certain points. But technology is almost always available. And it's because of its availability and its prevalence that makes, that essentially worsens our ability to remember. So our two main points, right? The first one that we get from the Carr reading, technology harms our ability to remember. The second is a point that I came up with. It's really my own point. It wasn't directly from the reading, but I kind of crafted this idea that this impairment of our memory is due to the prevalence of technology. So they're right in that it's not due to the direct impacts of technology. It's not like looking at a screen or, watching movies or whatever, like burns the neurons in our brain and like we can't remember things as well. It's not a direct impact from technology, but it's the existence, it's the prevalence of technology that causes us to not remember things as well. So again, I'm hoping that you're following along here. I know it's a little complicated, but you can always rewatch the video. And I've recorded this like 5 times, so you're just gonna have to to make do. So now we have technology harms our ability to learn and remember because it's become so prevalent that we rely on it too much. That's kind of putting those two ideas together. So what I'm going to do next, right? So I've used 2 quotes from both the readings. Now I just have to find a third source that goes down and continues with this thought process that I've started, right? And states ideally a real world impact like on our cognition of over-reliance on technology. So what happens when we rely on technology to remember things for us? and, a negative outcome. Because again, my thing is like, oh, it does harm our ability, right? That word harm means that it's not good. So I went and I searched the internet for a reputable source, which again, you can check out that video on how to find a reputable source. And I found a pretty good one. And it has a new idea though, and it sort of changes the nature, and I'll have to change my thesis a bit to make it work. But here are the quotes that I found. One says, quote, "No one medium is good for everything," Greenfield said. "If we want to develop a variety of skills, we need a balanced diet, a balanced media diet. Each medium has costs and benefits in terms of what skills each develops." End quote. So I guess I have to use the other quote to like make it make sense. So the other one says, "Studies show that reading develops imagination, induction, reflection, and critical thinking, as well as vocabulary. Reading for pleasure is the key to developing these skills. Students today have more visual literacy and less print literacy. Many students do not read for pleasure and have not for decades." End quote. So here they're introducing this new concept, right? This concept of visual versus print literacy. And they're saying that it's not necessarily that technology is bad, it's that it's a different, like, it relies most often on visual literacy. And so because of that, we're forgetting about print literacy, right? And that's what's causing harm, is that we're not, well, like, rounding ourselves out and learning from multiple sources anymore. Like, when was the last time you used a dictionary or an encyclopedia, right? So, again, this is introducing a new concept, which means I'm going to have to change my thesis a bit. So, like I said, it introduces, the idea of visual versus print literacy. And this took me a good 5 or 10 minutes to reword that thesis that I had before to come up with one that would make this reading work. But I ended up with this thesis that says, "Technology can harm our ability to remember because of its prevalence, and our over-reliance on technology means we have more visual literacy skills, means we have more visual literacy and less print literacy, which ultimately harms our cognitive abilities." I'm going to read that one more time. "Technology can harm our ability to remember because of its prevalence, and our over-reliance on technology means we have more visual literacy and less print literacy, which ultimately harms our cognitive abilities." So, it's a long thesis. Might be able to break it up into 2 sentences, but it's fine, I think, as is. But the highlighted parts all directly point to each of my readings, right? So here you can see the part in red is talking about the Carr reading and the Carr quote, right? The part in blue is talking about the one with 2 authors, right? And the part in green, I mean. The part in blue is talking about the one I found for my, my reputable source. So this is like an ideal thesis, I would say. It's where you can see the clear points that you're making, right? And then you can also see how those points tie back to specific evidence in your writing, or in your essay. So, yeah, I don't really, I know it was a long thesis, it was a long video, but what I'm getting at is you should be specific. Remember when at the beginning I was like, oh, you need to be specific? This is how you're specific. Technology can harm our ability to remember, right? That in its essence isn't necessarily specific, but it's the evidence that makes it specific. Oh, how does it do that? Oh, well, here's a quote that shows how it does that. And then even getting more specific, it's not that technology directly affects our memory, right? It's because of its prevalence. It's because we assume technology is going to be around that affects our memory, right? And then the last portion, and over-reliance on technology means we have more visual literacy and less print literacy, which ultimately harms our cognitive abilities. Tying in that last reading and that last idea, like talking more about learning here and less about remembering, and saying that, because we use visual literacy and we use technology so much, we're losing our print literacy skills, and therefore we don't have a well-rounded view or like learning capabilities, right? So this is, again, an example. You could go way different directions with this. You could choose the opposite side. You could find a different source for that third source, but I wanted to, or really Professor Solinger wanted me to come up with an example thesis to show you guys how I might approach something like this. Now, oh, I thought I had one more slide. Well, I guess I don't. If you have any questions, of course, you can always email me. I would highly recommend going back through this video and thinking of the steps that I took to get to this place. And again, I would highly recommend doing this work before you even start writing the essay, or at least do it for the first 2, because you have the Carr and the other one, right? The other reading. So go through and find quotes that are going to work for your general direction. You don't have to have the thesis written yet or have anything specific. But if you know, oh, I want to argue, no, technology does not harm our ability to learn and remember, then you probably want to start with the Cecutti reading and the Lee reading, right? Um, and because that one is kind of more pro technology, and then maybe work your way into the Carr reading. Okay, how can I make this Carr reading work for me? And then you would go and research and find a third reading that will work. Um, but yeah, I think that's everything. I'm gonna stop it here because honestly, my throat is starting to hurt. And yeah, if you have more questions, of course, you can email me. It's just in my tab in Blackboard, and my office hours are Monday 5 through 8. Good luck, and I will see you guys in class on, I think, the 12th, because this week we're not meeting. So, yes, take care, good luck, wish you the best. I know you guys can do it. You've already done it once, so just do it again. All right.